And verse 35, you might have to swipe and click, or you might be opening a real book. I'm becoming increasingly an advocate of the real book, having been through a smartphone phase, because there's nothing like the kind of real thing, but I have to be honest and say I've got an iPad in front of me, but there you go. But let's read together about our great God, and then Dave's going to come up and preach to us this morning. So, from verse 35. That day, when evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Jesus got up. He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Dave.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you all this morning. Welcome to our West Road site of Bridge Community Church. And also we'll say a welcome to those watching online as well, joining us this morning as we continue our Learning from Jesus series. And so we've been looking into what we can learn from the person of Jesus if we've tracked our way through the Gospel of Mark. And in particular this morning, we're talking about restoration. Something that happened to me about 40-odd years ago was I was walking through Salford Precinct up in Manchester. And I just visited a mate, and I was just heading back to my student accommodation. And suddenly, out the distance, I saw this crazy guy running at me. He was running, he was frothing at the mouth, his eyes were all over the show. And he shouted at me, "Do you want me to kill you? Do you want me to kill you?" And I remember just standing there, absolutely terrified. I froze to the spot, right in my face. "Do you want me to kill you?" And I was like, "Oh," and a combination of freezing and praying. Fortunately, he then just ran round me and carried on, and I never saw him again. And I was just like, wow, I was in pieces. I didn't know what to do or say. And we're going to see an instant similar that happened to Jesus. But of course, Jesus handles it so much better than us. Jesus handles everything so much better than us. And that's why we're doing this series, because we want to know better ways to handle things. And we want to discover the person who handles things better than us. And that's why we spend time focusing on Jesus. And in particular this morning, we're thinking about restoration. Jesus is brilliant at putting things back together again, even better than they were. That's what he can do for people's lives. And so this morning, as we wrestle with a little bit of another passage here in the book of Mark, think about what can Jesus restore in your life. Okay, 4 things to help us. 4 things that indicate Jesus is brilliant at restoring people and situations. First of all, we see Jesus is not scared of anything. I was terrified when I met somebody who seemed to be crazy. Jesus is not scared of anything, anyone, or any situation. He's got it sorted and can handle it. Secondly, when Jesus speaks into situations, things change. And part of that change we see, thirdly, he brings a serenity, a calmness, a sense of peace into situations of chaos and disorganization. And then he adds a sense of purpose to things as well as part of his restoration work. He doesn't just say, "Oh, well, you're all sorted now, crack on." No, he gives real purpose, real direction for people. And so that's where we're going to go this morning. And as I said earlier, we're turning to the Gospel of Mark. So if you can follow along on your Bibles, that would be great. John's already read to us part of chapter 4, and we'll be zooming in on chapter 5. But just a quick reminder, the Gospel of Mark, who was it written for? Why was it written? And it was written for the people at the center of the first century empire, Rome. It was written to Roman people, Western Europeans. And in a way, what they want resonates with us because they're people of empire. The people who love to be entertained. And they're people who loved encounters, especially when they saw victory, because that's what Rome was all about, victory. We'll encounter other cultures and people and we'll defeat them. And this kind of picture of what's going on there in Rome, Mark writes to these people, and these people in their sort of smug Roman Empire setting are being challenged. Is there something better out there than what we've got? We've got Caesar. We've got success. Is there something better out there? And Mark writes to them and says, yes, there is. There's Jesus. Something so much better than what you're going through at the moment. And this is the picture that Mark presents, and in particular, some of the hints, some of the signs about who Jesus is, we see in particular as Jesus overcomes evil that is thrown in his face. And so as we jump into Mark chapter 5, in chapter 4, Jesus has been teaching through his parables about the unstoppable nature of this new era, this new kingdom, this new order that God is bringing in through him. And this kingdom is silent, quietly working, but it is fundamentally unstoppable. And if to illustrate the point, Jesus says, right, we're going to go on a mission trip. He gets his closest followers and says, right, we're going to get in the boat and we're going to go on a mission trip to illustrate how powerful my new work and kingdom is. And of course, he doesn't pick somewhere easy. He goes right into enemy territory. The Bible describes it as the other side. The other side for first century Galilean Jews was huge. This was the other side of Lake Galilee. Usually people, if they wanted to go there, they would walk, because it was only a day's walk, but on this occasion they took an overnight boat, which led to a storm. And in a way, those disciples wouldn't have been surprised, because Galilee was seen as the abyss. It was seen as the gateway to the underworld. They did not like the water. Some of them may have been fishermen, but when they did their fishing, they usually did it with 100 meters of the shore. They weren't really that keen on going to the other side. The other side where the Romans dominated, in particular, their pagan culture reigned and ruled. And it was that dodgy, good Jewish people never even mentioned the name of the other side, because it meant in their era they would be considered ceremonially unclean. If I was to illustrate that today, thinking, now wear your parents' hat, if I was to say, right, I want your teenage boys and girls to come with me on an 18 to 30s holiday in Ibiza. This is basically what Jesus is doing in this situation. He's taking these young teenage lads who are his disciples and said, right, we're going to go to the worst place you can imagine in order to show the unstoppable nature of the kingdom of God. Going to overcome. And that's what we're going to see as Jesus overcame, first of all, nature's storm, and now we're going to see a human storm who needs to be restored. So let's read in Mark 5, verses 1 to 2. So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came from out of the tombs to meet him. This location nowadays, it's around, through archaeological study, the village of Cursa. And the Gerasenes was known as a place of the outcast. The nations who'd been thrown out of Israel over 1,000 years earlier hung out in this area, and then throw in the Roman pagan setting as well. It was not a good place to go. But here, through the archaeological digs, there is a village there. There are tombs there. There is a cliff there that is quite unique for the Lake of Galilee at that point in time. And it is here Jesus has this encounter with the man. Doesn't freeze like I do. Equally, he doesn't hold a prayer meeting. He doesn't do a psychological review of the man. He just seems to handle it because, as I said earlier, he's not scared. He's not surprised by any situation he faces here on earth. We continue to read in verses 3 and 4. The man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains and shackles from his wrists and smashed the shackles. This guy was out of control. All human efforts to restrain him were failing miserably. The Romans, with all their power and all their authority, said the only way we can deal with him is to kick him out of our towns. Let him live amongst the tombs. And so all human effort failed. It only seems to be a supernatural intervention can save this man. We continue to read in verses 4 and 5. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered around the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. What a picture. Yes, the terrifying picture of this man running at you, the crazy guy. But fundamentally, it was still a human being there, wasn't it? Do you see the imagery there? Just hanging out amongst the tombs, the sense of isolation, the sense of loneliness, the sense of rejection, the howling and crying out in the night, the self-harming that he's doing. This is one damaged individual that humanity can't seem to do anything with. And Jesus, rather than being scared of that situation, seems to be drawn into that situation. He sees the helplessness, he sees the hopelessness, and he says, I'm going to do something about it. So, what does Jesus do about it? Well, we read in verses 6 to 7 onwards, he begins to speak into that situation. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, "Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" So this man comes running up, drops to his knees. I wish I could say it was in worship, but it probably wasn't. More likely to just be begging that Jesus doesn't torture him. I find it fascinating as I read the first 4 books of the New Testament, the Gospels, that evil spirits and demoniacs don't seem to have any problem in understanding who Jesus was. Have you noticed that? It's amazing, because people who know their Bibles inside out, people who seem to go to church every single week back then seem to miss who Jesus was. But evil spirits have no problem recognizing him at all. Son of the Most High God. They're scared of the person who has suddenly arrived on their shores. The verses continue in verses 7 to 9. In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me. For Jesus had already said to the spirits, come out of the man, you evil spirit. And Jesus demanded, what is your name? So Jesus is almost trying to separate the man from these demons that are indwelling him at this point in time. We read in verses 9 to 10, the man replied, my name is Legion, because there are so many of us inside this man. Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. We begin to see the turmoil within this man. Legion. Actually, in that location, the Roman 10th Legion lived and dwelt and controlled that area. There were over 6,000 soldiers within that legion. So you can get the sort of imagery that's going on of the turmoil and battle that's going on in the mind, even in the text. 1 minute it's singular, next minute it's plurals. This dynamism that's going on within this man as he tries to handle what's going on here. And as we move into the next verses, again, something slightly significant that we don't always see is that 10th Legion who lived and dwelt and controlled that area, they had a symbol or an emblem of power. I bet you can't guess what it was. It was the boar pig. It was the pig, was their symbol of power. Now, let's see what happens next. Verses 11 to 13. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. Send us into those pigs, the spirits begged. Let us enter them. So Jesus gave them permission. See this battle of empire versus the kingdom of God here going on. These demons, their biggest fear was being disembodied. They'd found a home in this man. They did not want to return to the abyss and the underworld. They did not want to be disembodied. And so they spot these pigs, 2,000 of them on a hillside, and said, we'll take that option rather than going back to being these disembodied creatures as such. Let's see what happens next in verse 13. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hillside into the lake and drowned into the water. Here we see tangible evidence of something that had gone on in this man's life. Nobody who was there at that point in time could say, oh, well, he's just got a little bit better. There had clearly been this radical change. These things that possessed this man came out and impacted this huge herd of pigs. Such an act, tangible act of restoration. But also, I find it shocking just the level of destruction here. We sometimes like to play a little bit with evil. Oh, it's okay, it's not bad. Fundamentally, evil is destructive. We might not see it straight away, but fundamentally, it causes damage. Evil damaged this man's life horrifically, made him a social outcast, traumatized, haunted. Here we see the damage that's done to animal life as well. Of course, these pigs were only being bred to be meat for the Roman Empire, but still there's this radical impact as a result of these demons in this destructive way. And now as a result of the reaction of the pigs wiping themselves off down this hillside, the economy has been damaged as well. But there can be no doubt Jesus did an amazing work of transformation. When he speaks, amazing things happen. When he speaks, powerful things happen. God's word, the words of Jesus, they change situations. What's one of the changes we see? Well, we see a scene of serenity, peace, and calm. We read in verses 14 and 15, the herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened, and a crowd soon gathered around Jesus. Sounds like there was another stampede taking place. We have the stampede of pigs, now it's a stampede of herdsmen running into towns, villages, the countryside, saying, you want to see what's just happened here. And people start to gather around Jesus. And what do they witness? What do they see? Verse 15 says, they saw a man who'd been possessed by the legion of demons. He was sitting there, fully clothed, perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. Do you see the transformation? This man running around like some crazy guy is sitting there. This guy who was semi-naked has suddenly got some clothes on. That's helpful, isn't it, for social reintegration? It's all good. And he's perfectly sane. His mental health has been restored. Do you see? When Jesus steps into a situation and brings restoration, it's holistic. It's physical, it's spiritual, it's mental, it's emotional, it's social. Every single level. Jesus can deal with the whole person. Such is the impact when he steps in and speaks. And it's a scene of peace. This man, once enslaved by evil, is now enjoying God's goodness. This man who had a life of tyranny is now liberated by the Son of God. Sometimes as we read these things, I think, wow, that's a bit mad, David. But there's still many people living lives reflecting this, mentally struggling with their mental health, struggling with their physical situation, struggling with their spiritual situation, struggling with what's going on in life. Jesus, as I say, is not scared of it. He's drawn to it and can bring this peace and this calm, this transformation. The people are afraid. And what's their continued reaction? We see in verses 16. Those who'd seen what happened told others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs. And the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. They could only plead, couldn't they? They'd seen the power of Jesus. They couldn't tell him what to do. But they beg and plead. Fear and ignorance is dominating their thinking and their decision-making. Instead of being excited about the compassion of Jesus, they're scared. They're ignorant. And their way of dealing with it is, get out of here, Jesus. I can't get my head around what you could do in a person's life. I don't want any of it. Get out of here. Again, strange. It's a scene of serenity, a scene of calm. You'd think, this is a good thing, isn't it? And yet for them, not interested. Want to push it away. Amazing what Jesus offers scares people. And people push it away when it seems so good, so restorative, so transformational. And yet that can be the reaction of people. And lastly, we see that Jesus sends, as we turn to verses 8 and 19. Jesus was getting into the boat. The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus said, no, go home to your family. Tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been. This seems really surprising, doesn't it? Jesus is often inviting people to join him. And this guy's going, can I get in the boat with you and your mates? And it seems a no-brainer. Of course you can, fella, jump in. And actually what Jesus does, he sends him away. Isn't that strange? Isn't that weird? Because the guy hasn't been to Moreland's Bible College, allegedly. Incredible. I know John thinks that's the only Bible college in the world. This guy hasn't been. Scary. You know, he's got no support.
Jesus right next to him, you know. I mean,
Yeah, but he was going to separate John.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a bit cheaper than Moreland's Bible College as well. No, Moreland's is a great place. I didn't bother learning there. I just teach there occasionally. So, you know. But anyway, moving on quickly. And if we could take that offline, that would be good. But yeah, this guy's so underprepared, isn't he? He's so unsupported. He doesn't know his Bible. He's from this Roman pagan world. He's got no fellowship. He's got no mates. And Jesus says, yeah, you're getting in the boat now. Get out the boat and go back home. Tell people your story. Tell people about the mercy and compassion I've had. And you just think, it's a bit of an ask, Jesus, isn't it? What was the impact? Did it work? Is a question as we turn to verse 20. So the man started off straight away, obeyed to visit the 10 towns, Decapolis, that area was called, of that region, and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. So this guy returns to the people who knew him best, his family. This guy returns to a pagan world with no Bible education, no knowledge, no insights, apart from an encounter with Jesus that radically changed his life and some grasp of the mercy of God. And apparently that is enough to cause amazement amongst non-believing people. How exciting is that? Your story, my story of the restoration of Jesus and unpacking a little bit of the mercy of God is enough for your workplace, for your family, for your neighborhood to make a difference. Let me unpack what I mean by make a difference. 4,000 people amazed. That's not bad. How can I say that? Well, if you carry on reading in the book of Mark, a few chapters later, a few months later, Jesus reappears in exactly the same point. And instead of one crazy guy coming to meet him, 4,000 people are ready to meet with him. What would have been the catalyst from that? We suspect it was this man and his story. Not too bad. Within a few months, 4,000 people coming to see Jesus. Wow, imagine that problem here in our Bridge Community Church. Let me say it didn't stop there. There was a church planting movement that took place in that pagan enemy territory. Again, archaeology has unpacked so many churches there. The most famous church there is the Church of Hippos. And it was the Bishop of Hippos who actually physically wrote the Nicene Creed, which is our statement of faith that we use as a church today. Again, one crazy guy who had an encounter with Jesus leads to 4,000 people coming to Jesus and then leads to a church planting movement that then leads a legacy for 2,000 years that we still experience the benefit from. Talk about the restoration power of Jesus. Talk about the potential within each of us, because you've got a restoration story and you understand the mercy of God if we choose to share it with a pagan, non-believing world. Can you imagine the potential in this room if we get our heads around this? So what's Jesus saying to us today? Is there a situation where we're scared? Do we need to bring Jesus into that situation? Is there a situation where we're probably a bit silent? Do we need to speak the words of Jesus into a situation? Whoops. Do we need to say something? Is there a situation of chaos and pain? Do we step into that situation all within the power and presence of Jesus and bring a sense of restoration? And can we go? Can we do the send part like this man? As I thought about this, some reasons why sometimes we struggle to do this came to mind. David, I'm embarrassed. I actually want to be liked. I don't want to be a Jesus freak. I don't want my mates to all pull away from me because I start talking about Jesus. Yeah, I get that. Fear of losing friends. Often we don't have many real friends and we don't want to push them away by being all weird. Well, sometimes, God, David, you should see the questions my mates have got. Can't answer them. Well, imagine how underprepared this man was. He just had a story of restoration, just had a story of a glimpse of the mercy of God. And that was enough. And maybe we've got enough more than we actually think just through our story. Might say a lack of opportunity. Can we create those opportunities to connect with people who are unchurched and don't know much about the things of Jesus? Phil Knox, who works for the Evangelical Alliance, suggests that actually the restoration story of Jesus is like a contagious virus. And of course, we know nothing about contagious viruses, do we, as a people? We may have experienced contagious viruses a little bit over the last few years with COVID, mightn't we? And Phil actually uses the COVID picture in order to say how powerful our story can be if we would share about it. He talks about 3 P's: proximity, potency, and passion. He was saying when we get up close to people, that story of restoration comes out. It infects them because we're close. Just like a COVID virus infects people when we get too close and breathe on them. In a way, that's the picture Phil's using. Get close to people. Let your story infect them. See the potency, see the power of it. Become a super spreader. We used to talk about that, didn't we, during COVID? You go into a wedding or something like that. 2 people turn up maybe with COVID, then everybody's got it within the week. This super spreader attitude. Phil says, can we be that person with the restoration news of Jesus? And can we have a passion for it? He talks about pox parties. Do you remember that with your kids? I can't remember if it was Ryan or Lewis, one of my boys, but for one of their birthday parties, we hired out one of those play areas, and one of them had chicken pox. And the other parents were so excited to come to the party because their kids hadn't had chicken pox. And they know that chicken pox is far better to get as a kid rather than an adult. So it became known as the pox party. Yeah, let's go to that party because our kids will get chicken pox. This is the image he's saying here. Can we be that passion to spread the good news about the restoration work Jesus has done? Can we unleash rather than restrain and contain the story? You've got a story to tell. You've got a restoration work. Okay, you may not have had some spectacular 2,000 pigs stampeding around you. You've still got a story. Still got a story to share. Can we share it and share about the wonderful mercy of God? Before we take communion, I'm going to invite Rich and Dario up again as we're going to sing this song, Oceans, talking about the depths as we engage with King Jesus. So please, if you are able,